sir. What office are you running for in Massachusetts?
How you doing? I'm Bill Sombrello. I'm running for U.S. Congress in the 9th Congressional District. That's the South Shore, Cape Cod, and the islands.
And what's your position? What's your platform?
The platform is a progressive position that includes single-payer health care, $15 minimum wage, forgiving tuition debt, a Green New Deal, and basically an economy that provides some stability and equity to all of us here rather than just the 1%.
And what's your connection to the Monsanto protest here today about the GMO foods?
Well, I'm an environmental chemist, so I have a very strong connection and understanding about what Monsanto has been about and what they are about, and I'll be addressing that later today, talking about what the downfall is of what Monsanto has been doing both here and around the world.
Thank you, sir.
My pleasure, thank you.
Sir, why are you here protesting Monsanto at Park Street in Boston?
Well, I don't think the United States should be ruled by corporations. I think the United States should be ruled by the people and their elected representatives. And so I came down today because this Roundup product that Monsanto sells for weed control, which is used in public parks and along railroad tracks to keep the weeds away. I've done some light research on the matter, and I've read some articles which indicate that some of these products are risky. And why take on a risk when the risks are can be deadly? And cancer just seems to be out of control in this country. I've lost 2 people in my family from cancer. So I say, better to be safe than sorry. So if there's a risk, let's avoid the risk.
Well, thank you, sir, for your comments.
You're welcome.
Have you stand in front of the banner here, and we have a camera recording this. So thank you again, everybody, for being here. My name is Margaret Alexander. I want to thank the Green Rainbow Party of Massachusetts, Food for Activists, for sponsoring this. And going to start out with David Rold, who has been a key organizer in getting us all together and getting us organized, not just this year, but years past. So thank you, David, and
thank you, Margaret. I'm David. I'm one of the organizers, and I wanted to thank one more sponsor. We have the Committee for Peace and Human Rights, who have a anti-war peace vigil out here every week that they've been doing for 20 years. And I think that's important to note, that the March Against Monsanto and the struggle against poison chemicals and for food justice is like part of the anti-war movement, part of the peace movement. Because well, for one thing, they're really poisoning us. These GMOs, they don't really test them. They don't know what they'll do to us. They cause a lot of problems. Like they might be they make rats and mice like infertile in the 2nd and 3rd generation after they've ingested them. And the glyphosate is poison. It's like recognized as a carcinogen. That's the main ingredient in Roundup, and it's being used so much. It's in our water. It's even gets in our organic food because the Roundup is like so prevalent. And now they have this thing called CRISPR, where they're just editing genes in plants and with not adding new genes, so that's just as dangerous, but there's even less regulation of that, and they're going to start like selling us food that's produced by CRISPR like without any testing or regulation of it. And Western corporations to control countries around the world and to run the world. And a lot of countries don't allow GMOs and Monsanto in. Like Russia banned GMOs, so that's part of the reason for all this Russiagate stuff and this like rush to war against Russia is that Russia banned GMOs. Like there was the U.S. government did the coup in Ukraine and install the Nazi government in Ukraine so that they could bring Monsanto in to grow GM corn and crops in Ukraine. And some of the Monsanto chemicals have even been used as chemical weapons, like Agent Orange in Vietnam, like, you know, is still killing people, causing birth defects in Vietnam, and that's really a version of Roundup. And the same thing in Colombia, Plan Colombia, they went in with a really strong version of Roundup to saying they were trying to kill all the cocaine plants, but it was really like chemical warfare against Colombia. And in Africa, they've like tried to bring in genetically modified crops, and countries that don't agree to it, they go on TV and they say that Sudan, for instance, was refusing to accept food aid because they wouldn't accept frankenfood crops, but really they were trying to protect their agricultural system. So
here I appreciate the invitation and the opportunity, and fortunately we don't have the best weather here, but we'll make the best of it, I guess. As Margaret said, my name is Bill Sombrello. I'm running for U.S. Congress in the 9th Congressional District here in Massachusetts, and that covers much of the South Shore, the Cape, and the islands. And I do have a background as an environmental chemist, and I've always been very deeply passionate about our ecosystems, about the water we drink, about the air we breathe, and about the food we eat. But you don't need to be a chemist to realize that a chemical like glyphosate, which is sold under the name of Roundup, is poisonous. After every study that Monsanto has paid for every single one of those studies, there are another dozen studies that have shown that the compound glyphosate may be poisonous or is inconclusive. Moreover, due to the secretive nature of the formulations in the sprays being used, it may very well be that some of the other constituents in the spray may be more dangerous than the glyphosate itself. We know from experience that too much of a good thing may actually turn into a bad thing. It's true of antibacterial soaps that have caused bacteria to mutate to stronger resistant strains. It's true of our fossil fuel-driven cars that emit millions of tons of greenhouse gases. And it's true about a nation bent on empire building under the guise of spreading democracy. And it's also true about this little compound we've come to know as glyphosate. You see, like the bacteria building up an immune system to the soaps, so too have the weeds built up immunity to glyphosate. This has left the farmers with little option but to use greater amounts of this spray or go to stronger sprays. And in fact, in the 1990s, Monsanto is introduced genetically engineered corn and soy specifically to be able to better withstand their own poison. Since then, glyphosate sales have skyrocketed, and instead of solving the weed problem, Monsanto has made commercial farmers dependent, if not addicted, to the chemicals and the engineered crops. Of Monsanto's and special interests that are deciding our fate instead of we the people.
Listen, you know, I grew up on a farm in India. Anyone been to India here? No. Okay, you have. My grandmother was a poor village farmer who'd work 16 hours days in the field, and that's how they sustained themselves. Well, those farms have been destroyed all over South India because of Monsanto. So this is a very personal thing for me. As Dean said, this is not a left or right issue. This is not a Republican or Democrat issue. This is a human issue. And if you look at both of these political parties, the establishment is one. It's one devil with two faces. And we got to come to a conclusion on this as activists. For far too long, we've thought that the Democratic Party would take care of this. We clearly know the other party doesn't support this anyway. And the activist movement in the United States needs to break with both political parties on this issue, because neither of them support you or me. They support Monsanto. Okay, so this is a personal issue for me. So when I saw my grandmother heal people using traditional systems of medicine, that's what got me interested in medicine. I came here as a 7-year-old kid, went through the public school systems. By the time I was 14, I was doing medical research. Went to MIT, the military-industrial academic complex we all know about, right? The part of the deep state. Well, working at MIT gave me access to knowledge that most people do not have access to. And they're probably very upset that I got 4 degrees from that place, including my PhD in biological engineering. So how did I get involved in this? Well, you got to understand, in 2014, I was walking down the halls of MIT and I saw this front page article on the front page of Technology Review. I don't know if you know this. This is considered the most eminent technology magazine. And on the front page, do you know what it said? It said, "Buy fresh, buy GMOs." Buy fresh, buy GMOs, written by the institution that we are all supposed to bow down to, because they're supposed to be the major technology and scientific institute in the United States, right? Well, I looked at this and I said, this is really weird. And I just finished my PhD, had just come back from India on a Fulbright, had just created a new technology which allowed us to mathematically model molecular pathways and understand what's going on at the molecular level. And I was using it for helping herbs and other types of things. And I said, wait a minute, this is interesting. And by the way, as you read this article, it's a completely bullshit article. The article is basically a neo-missionary article written by the neo-missionaries like the Gates Foundation to tell all the darkies in Africa and India, me being a darkie, I can say that, that these people need GMOs. And if you read the article, it's completely bogus, because the issue is not genetically engineered foods. The issue is that there's other fundamental issues of irrigation, etc. And the United States imperialists and globalists have destroyed the infrastructure of soil of other countries. Henry Kissinger said, if you want to control people, control their oil, but if you want to control a country, control oil, but if you want to control a people, control their soil. Now, that policy has been supported by, both Democrats and Republicans. We cannot trust either of these parties. Elizabeth Warren voted for the Monsanto Protection Act. She is not a fighter for you or me. She voted against Bernie's GMO labeling bill. And after we started attacking her, suddenly she says, now I'm going to stop the Monsanto-Bayer merger. Well, too little, too late, Elizabeth. All right? This movement needs to take off, and it needs to happen now. So let me tell you what I did. So we used our technology, which allows us to model molecular pathways, and we looked at, you see, glyphosate is to those of you who don't know, glyphosate is the actual herbicide, which was created by Monsanto and Dow, the same company that created Agent Orange, all right, which was used to devastate not only the Vietnamese, but also our veterans who still are not taken care of. Well, that same company retooled that delivery engine to drop glyphosate on factory farms. Well, one of the important agricultural products that we have in the United States, 97% of the soy in the United States is genetically engineered. 97%, which occurs everywhere in our food supply. So we looked at soy, and what I did was very cleverly, because I knew if I published one paper, they would destroy me, right? I understand how scientists work. So we published the first paper where we showed that genetically engineered foods, we found out that in every plant, every bacterium, every fungi, there's a very particular system called C1 metabolism. I don't want to take you into too much science, but it's fundamentally a way how plants sequester carbon, and then they detoxify the process using a process called formaldehyde detoxification. Basically, every plant's like a little engine. You see, it has a very powerful antioxidant called glutathione. and it uses that to detox formaldehyde. So normal plants have high levels of this. Well, what our research showed was when they did the genetic insertion, that it actually perturbs the entire system, and you have 256% less glutathione. And that's why formaldehyde levels have been reported in not only soy, but in also corn. Well, we know why that's being caused. Well, anyway, we published a series of 4 papers. Kevin Folta, who some of you may know of, is a horticulturist at the University of Florida State University, started attacking me. And a FOIA was issued on him, and 4,000 emails came out showing that he was paid off by Monsanto. Here's the head of the horticultural department. What we live in right now is those universities across the river over there, MIT and Harvard, do fake science. The fake science then is used by the media to do fake news. You see, because journalists no longer do any type of reporting anymore. They cut and copy, and then it gets fossilized on Wikipedia. That's how it occurs. But I'll tell you, you're looking at someone who's put his time in. You know, I know science. That's a problem that MIT has and the military-industrial complex has. I know the fact that how the political systems work. If you guys have a chance, there's a movie I just did with that Pierce Brosnan just funded. It's called Poisoning Paradise. It's about the devastation of what's going on in the island of Kauai.
Get everyone's name, but some excellent speeches. So, I'm Jen Stamis. I'm running for Massachusetts State Auditor with the Green Rainbow Party because I am sick of the two-party oligarchy. Both parties take money from lobbyists, from corporate interests, and we know, thank you, it's been in the paper, there's a culture of sexual harassment. When there's a sexual harassment complaint, a non-disclosure agreement is signed and people are paid out of our taxpayer money, and we don't know what happened. I think Massachusetts citizens have the right to know when sexual harassment and abuse is going on Beacon Hill. And so, thank you. I've participated in the March Against Monsanto for many years. In fact, I wrote a paper back in middle school in the 80s about GMOs, and I just want to say back then we knew about the risks of GMOs. People were writing about this, but it was pushed through by Monsanto, by big corporations like Bayer and other GMO companies. And this year I've decided to turn my words into action and run for auditor because the current auditor, Suzanne Bump, and the auditor before her, they only performed selective audits. They've only looked at a few computers here, a few invoices over there. They haven't looked at the system as a whole. And state law, if you look at the Massachusetts state law requires that every government entity and agency be audited once every 3 years. And if you look at the website, if you look at Suzanne Bump's website, she has not audited every government entity or state government entity or agency every 3 years. There's many major agencies like the Environmental Police, for example, who she only audited once. Other agencies she hasn't audited at all in 8 years. So I'd like you to check that out. So as auditor, what I'm going to do is I'm going to arrange my office to look at all state systems, as well as the system as a whole. I'm not just going to look at minor details. And this way, more productive recommendations can be made as to how government can actually serve the interests of the people in our communities, not the money to lease.
Richer, the world gets sicker.
Monsanto gets richer, the world gets sicker.